influence techniques, it wouldn't be persuasion techniques, it would be confidence. If I'm training someone to go recruit foreign assets to spy on their own country for America, I need confidence, number one. There is nothing else. Would you all consider me a confident person? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. I can probably out-confidence anybody. I never feel a need to, but I can do anything. But I have the same, if not more, limiting beliefs as everybody here. When Eli's introducing me 10 minutes ago, there's something in my head that said, everybody's going to laugh at you. They're going to know you're faking it. You're full of shit. I don't care if you've done this for 30,000 hours. I don't care if you wrote the #1 best-selling book. They're going to know you're faking it. That's still in my head. As I'm standing here, it's in my head. It does not go away. So the beliefs we had as kids, the beliefs about ourselves and what we're capable of and what we should do, everyone in this room carried into adulthood without our consent and without our awareness. What if I had an alcoholic dad or an asshole parent? Don't make too much noise. Always ask if someone needs help. That's the only way mom's going to like me. So the moment that those limiting beliefs start coming up, I want you to get into a habit of identifying those over and over again and keeping them in a folder. And here's the second part. I want you to keep a running list of the limiting beliefs, and whatever is your most embarrassing or most powerful limiting belief, and have it really big right on your desktop, right on your phone wallpaper. I will never be good enough. Right in front of you. What it's going to do is make you look at that and say, how stupid? How stupid is this? Can you convince your dog with words? Can you convince your dog with a poster? Then it's not going to rewire your life. Because there's an animal brain that makes all those choices, and the animal can't read. Your conscious mind is going to be there to remind you that it's very, very stupid, and the relationship starts to change very rapidly over time. So what I want you to do is pretend that those limiting beliefs are coming through a radio station, some kind of Sirius XM, whatever. I need you to name that radio station and figure out what that's called. So the moment it happens, what do you have as ammunition? You know the name of the words that we're listening to. So now this thing has a name. When we name something, we take ownership of it. But I want you to imagine yourself, and I want you to make this as vivid as you possibly can. You're walking through a mall, and you have a 6-year-old kid. You're holding this kid's hand, and every 5 or 6 steps, the kid looks up at you and says, somebody's going to laugh at you. They're going to judge you. It's going to be funny. We would smile at that because of the source. And then you look down at that little kid and realize that's you. Those are all the things that kept you safe as a kid, or all the things that you, as a child, thought would keep you safe. The moment we make a decision to hear those things as fiction, everything changes. Confidence changes. How do we trigger limiting beliefs? Push a little bit outside the comfort zone. There's no secret 5-step formula technique. Get the hell out of the comfort zone. The limiting beliefs are going to come up. Identify them, write them down, put a wallpaper, make them into a wallpaper of your phone, of your desktop. And what does a dog respond to? Words or emotion? So what's the emotion that's being felt when you see your limiting belief in big lights, big billboard of it? You're like, wow, that's stupid. Shame, embarrassment, anger, but never enjoyment and never acceptance. You're looking at it's right there in front of you. Everything changes. If you were selling something and you genuinely believed, and I want you to understand the word genuine, not like self-help seminar genuine, but like real human life, actually believe that your product is the best in the world, and that you're the salesperson in the world, and that you can connect to anybody better than pretty much anybody. Would that be slightly delusional? Is believing you're not worth it delusional? Is believing you shouldn't stand up delusional? You're already delusional. All we're doing is picking what we're delusional about. Why can't I just do the other thing? I'm already lying to myself. I'm already delusional. I'm just going to choose to do the other thing. And when you start to act confident, they're going to come up again. And what our first response to those limiting beliefs should be gratitude. What would you say to a 6-year-old kid trying to tell you that? Well, thank you so much. I realize you're trying to help me. I really appreciate that. But I'm a grown-up now. And that's what's holding people back. That's what's holding salespeople back who lack confidence, managers and leaders in companies who lack confidence. This is it. The soil has to come first. The limiting beliefs have to be number one priority because the beliefs are what's under everything. Finally, when it comes down to confidence, I want to talk to you about what confidence actually is. And I think it's a mixture of two things. So all of our doubts about confidence, everything keeping you from confidence is lack of safety. Confidence is safety. The word's overconfidence, which is how I describe it to make it seem more dangerous. Overly confident. Over what line? Overconfident people have an advantage that other people will never, from birth to death, they will never enjoy. Overly confident people get better results and better outcomes from humans than anyone else in the world. Think Bill Clinton's delusional? You bet your ass he is. Overconfidence, unfair advantage, better results than anyone else in the world when it comes to leadership and obviously sales. So I said confidence was about two things. The first thing I said was safety. The second thing is a generalized, remember that word, not specific, generalized expectation of positive outcomes. Just basically, things are going to be all right. That's it. Things are going to be just fine. And I'm completely safe. I'm at home. And I'm comfortable. Instead of having a positive affirmation watering the plant, you get rid of the shit that the plant's sitting in first. Then the roots will change over time. We have to focus on the hardcore stuff, which is at the bottom. In the soil is where it matters. There are thousands of videos on YouTube focused on developing discipline, thinking better, changing your thoughts. I'm going to give you something radically different, but they all miss one critical thing. I'm going to tell you what that is in just a second, but consider some of the things that you're going to hear some of these videos say. You've got to think about what you want, not what you lack. Focus your mind on your goals. Ignore the bad news and media because it pollutes your brain. Write your goals down, keep a journal, wake up early every day, make your bed, spend time wisely, care for other people, eliminate sources of negativity in your life. Those are all great, but there's one thing that they all miss that literally determines your ability to do all of those things. And I'd like to give you a need to know in 10 minutes or less. There are 3 critical things you need to succeed. The first 2 are things that no one in the motivation and personal development world ever talks about because it's hard to monetize. Number 1 is getting ahead of yourself. Number 2 is responsibility for your electricity. And number 3 is responsibility for your ingredients. Let's talk about these 3 really quick and unpack those. Number 1, getting ahead of yourself. Discipline is when your mind is in the future, and that's it. Put the needs of your future self ahead of your own. Think about all the times that your present tense self maybe drank too much or stayed up too late, chose to watch TV instead of preparing for an exam or a meeting. What happened? When it came time to perform the next day, in the future, you were pissed off at your past tense self for not caring about you. So spend your time focused on you, not the you right now, the you tomorrow, the you 5 years from now. So how would you act if you were more concerned with how your actions would affect you 5 years from now than they would right here in this moment? How would you eat? How would you work? How would you maybe spend money? People make a mistake when they analyze successful people on podcasts and YouTube interviews. All the things they try to find what successful people have in common are unique to those people, their business, their life. The one thing that matters, the one thing they all have in common is this one thing. They all have that ability to prioritize the needs of their future selves ahead of their own. So when their friends went out to a party, they worked, not because they enjoyed it, but because their future self would enjoy it. When their friends ate bad food, they opted for something that would benefit them in the future. So try to make this happen today. Stop focusing on how it's going to feel today. Your future self will exist, and all of your success is going to come down to this one point. Will you look back at your past behavior with either regret or gratitude? So number two, be responsible for your own electricity. Your brain runs on about 12 volts of electricity. It's an electric organism, and you get to pick where that electricity goes. So like when you buy a new car, the reason that you start seeing it everywhere is because you've unknowingly told your brain that it's important to you. You focused your attention heavily on something and it was produced in your life. So we've all seen proof of this. What you focus on always grows. And some people call this the law of attraction, the universe, energy, vibration, whatever it is. It comes down to this. We know it works no matter what we call it. The entire law of attraction can be summed up, I think, in four words: responsibility for your thoughts. And that's what that is. So get totally clear about what you want to put in your brain's electrical center. Do you want to have the fear manufacturing news story in there so that your brain thinks that's what it needs to look for? So all the negative stuff, your brain is getting told, I'm going to go look for negative things because that's what they are telling me to look for. Do you honestly want to tell your brain to seek out anger, hatred, failure, and lack? So get responsible for what you put into your brain. That electricity is precious and it's going to seek out whatever you show it. So whatever you focus on, you can't talk to your brain. It can only observe what you're focusing on. So pick those things very carefully. Show your brain what you want, not what you fear. So number three, choose your ingredients. This is kind of what nobody talks about. It's the single thing that makes everything else possible. So in order to do any of these things well, like thinking positively or focusing on your goals, waking up early, those things all require something to be in place first, and that is you. The one thing you can't really exchange for store credit or trade in when you don't like it anymore is you. The one machine that does all the things is you. Would you dump a bunch of salt into your car's gas tank? Absolutely not. So when we think about the machines in our lives, we only give them what makes them run at their very best. We add maybe premium gasoline, good oil to the engine, and nothing else. All the thoughts that you have and every goal you set passes through you first. So what you put in this machine, your body, matters a lot. So what if you treated your body the same way you treated your car? What would happen if you only put into this machine you were given at birth exactly what it needs to function at its highest level? Every single thing that you put into this machine matters, and it matters forever. For you, for your goals, for your family. Someone telling you to keep the car pointed at the destination is great. But if the gas tank is full of sand and the engine's packed with water instead of oil, it might function for a few minutes, but what would happen? The machine's going to stop working. It's going to stop achieving the goal that you want it to do. The person tells you, well, I guess I didn't do what I suggested. You didn't set goals correctly. You didn't focus on your outcome enough. And that's why you're not successful. But what you put into your machine is what really makes the difference in whether or not you're going to get all the outcomes you want this year. The skin on your arm isn't the same skin that you were born with. Your body replaces everything over time. So you get to choose what your body is made of. Like that skin on your arm right now is made up of stuff that you ate. It's made up of things that you ate. What you put into your body matters for your success more than any coach will ever tell you, because that stuff's hard to monetize. Setting goals is wonderful and necessary for success, but they're hard to reach if your brain is running on garbage. There are thousands of programs that promise to deliver these secrets of what to eat, and I'll sum all of those secrets up in 20 seconds. Stop eating highly processed foods. Stop eating foods with high levels of salt, sugar, and fat. And if you don't recognize an ingredient on the label, don't eat it ever. The longer the shelf life of the food, the worse it is probably for you. Four-legged animals should be avoided or consumed minimally. Don't ever eat foods that are drastically altered from their original form, like apples, juice, chicken nuggets, vegetable chips, potato chips. The less something has been modified from its original form, the healthier it is. Plan your meals in advance this year and always have some snacks handy that actually come from the earth instead of a factory. So cook rice or something ahead of time. Prepare for your cravings in advance and put that stuff in the fridge. When you're traveling, find healthy places to eat ahead of time. Avoid packaged foods in all forms as much as possible. The good foods are mostly around the kind of the perimeter of the grocery store. The middle is the packaged stuff. Choose ethically raised animals. And this isn't just some kind of a protest thing. Not only is it probably the right thing to do, those factory raised animals live a horrible life. And those stress chemicals like cortisol in the animal stay in the meat. That's a fact. Eating well is not about how long you live, it's about how well you live. And you deserve high quality thoughts and feelings. And the machine that makes them is depending on you to get it running at its highest level. You are in charge. The link in the description contains a completely free behavior training kit to get you started. And I really hope you enjoy this video, and please consider subscribing. I will see you next time. And please remember, you are in charge. I love you. Hey, it's Chase Hughes. There's going to be a lot of goal setting videos coming out, but I want to show you a quick and easy way to do this. And I'm going to expose to you some of the ways that brainwashing is actually used on people and the exact formula to do it. And the reason I want to do this is because I want you to be able to use these brainwashing techniques on yourself. Let's get started. So first, let's talk a little bit about evolutionary psychology. There's a theory out there called the triune brain theory, that our brain evolved in 3 stages, where the first part of the brain to evolve was this little guy down here, the little brain stem. This is actually what keeps our heart going, our blood flow, our breathing, digestion, all of our circulation, all the stuff that we can't consciously do. We can't consciously control it. The next part was this little guy up here. This is the mammalian brain. So this is kind of like the brain of an animal. And finally, we had the neocortex, which covers up everything. And literally, the word cortex means cover. So if we're looking at the animal part of the brain, we kind of imagine something that's inside of an animal's head, be it a chimpanzee or your dog. It's pretty similar. There's some intelligence and IQ differences there, but they're kind of similar. One thing that's absolutely certain is that the mammalian part of the brain doesn't really comprehend language at all. So what happens? The reason for this part of the brain, this is when we feel fear, when we experience something that's fearful, when we see something we really like, when we see a potential sexual partner. It all rings off, but it doesn't work off of words. It works off of visual images. It works off of pain. It works off of reward and fear. So what it looks like down on the inside part of this brain is this little part right here. So if this is what we really make all of our decisions with, which it is, most of our decisions in life come from this part of the brain. So if we have a mammalian brain here in this little area and just a little bit surrounding this, how would we speak to that thing, that part of our brain that cannot understand English or any language? How do we communicate to that? It's the most powerful thing. It drives our emotions. It drives our decisions. Our behaviors are really down deep inside of this part of our brain, but we can't talk to it. So how would you speak to an animal? How would I convey a message to an animal? We have to do things that are visual and emotional. And we're really going to break this down in just a few seconds. When your brain thinks that something is really important to you, it looks all over the place for it. Think of the last time you bought a new car and you drove around the entire city and all you could see was that exact make and model of vehicle. And it wasn't that a bunch of people just went out and got them right when you did. You just started noticing them because your brain somehow thought, okay, they think this is important. I'm going to start looking for it everywhere I go. And that's called the reticular activating system inside of our brain. It's basically a focus flashlight. And that's really important to us because the more we are reminded of doing something, the more we're reminding our brains that something is important to us, the more the brain's going to look for it. And we all know somebody who talks negatively all the time. They complain about things all the time. And that's what they get in their life. That's what their brain says, oh, this person wants me to go find all these negative things. I'm going to go find them. But we're going to get down into the brainwashing part of that and how that applies in just a second. There's been a lot of studies done on success. One of the most profound was a study where they followed people from a very young age, 5 or 6 years old, all the way until they were 40. And the people who became older and were successful all had one big thing in common, and that's the ability to delay gratification. That ability to delay gratification was the single biggest factor in whether or not those people wound up successful later in life. And that's just the introduction to what discipline really is. And I'd like to give you my definition from a behavioral expert's perspective of discipline. And discipline is when, in the moment, you are placing your future self's needs ahead of your own. That means the benefit to you in the future is more important than the reward in the present. And if you think about this, people who are overeating, people who don't go to the gym, people who eat bad food, people who are doing things that are not good for them, drinking too much, smoking cigarettes, whatever it is, it all boils down to whether or not they're prioritizing the needs of their future self or the desires of their present self. So when you think about your future self, I want you to think that needs to be my number one priority. And we'll get down into this a little bit deeper in just a second. Let's talk about two key concepts here in a really tight package, just so you can understand these concepts before we move into this brainwashing part of goal setting and what it really means. The first is that most of our failures we can attribute to future self-neglect. Now I'll say that again. Most of our problems in our life we can attribute to future self-neglect. I'm neglecting my future self. Think about how many times you've been pissed off at yourself because you stayed up late and you had an exam the next morning. Or there was something going on in your life, you decided to go party at night and you know you had a big meeting or a job interview the next day or an exam. We tend to be upset at our past tense self, not really realizing that what we're doing now is setting things up for the future self, whether we like it or not. And the second key concept here that I really want to unpack for you, especially with this goal setting mentality, is habit versus discipline. And we've all heard people, our friends, maybe it's you, we've all heard people that say, oh, he goes to the gym every day. I wish I had that kind of discipline. Or I see her going to yoga or working out every day of her life. I wish I had that level of discipline in my life. But there's a secret there, a behavioral secret, that with those people, what you're seeing is not discipline. You're seeing a habit. Discipline's only required a few times, just like a teaspoonful of discipline, just to get a habit started to where it becomes a repetitive behavior. And neurons in the brain literally form a superhighway the more often you do something. And that's a huge part of the brainwashing formula that I developed for the military coming up next. The brainwashing formula has an acronym that spells out FEAR, and that stands for focus, emotional involvement, agitation, and repetition. In those four, the focus part means that you need a person's undivided attention. Something has to be so important to a person that they're very focused on what's going on in the present moment. In the emotional part, we need the emotion to be involved for behavioral change. And we also do this for ourselves when we're changing ourselves. If I want to communicate something to that animal brain, like we talked about earlier, I need emotion. I need visualization on a very regular basis. And agitation means that something has to be disrupted. In a brainwashing scenario, someone might get their head shaved or wear outfits that are way too big for them, or be placed in a room that's not comfortable, or be deprived of sleep in some way. In your life, all we need to do is change things up. And what we're doing is we're tricking that little 3-pound piece of meat inside of our skull, that little animal brain that's in there. We're tricking it into thinking this is a new environment. I need to pay more attention to what's going on. So the more you're able to agitate your life, you wake up at a different time, you change your routines around, you move the furniture around in your house, change the light bulbs to a different type of light bulb. Anything you can do to signal to your brain, this is a different era, I've started a new chapter in my life, whatever you can do, it automatically makes the brain start paying more and more attention to what's going on. And we get that emotional involvement. Some people have talked about vision boards before. And this is where, like, one of my goals that I'm setting for the next year is going to be, I'm going to buy this type of house or this type of car. I want to make this kind of money. Some of these people that do vision boards, and a lot of them attribute this to a spiritual thing, which I don't know much about. I'll give you the science behind that. If you have a vision board with all of these photos that are tied to what you're looking for, I've got the photo of the house, the photo of the car, the things that I want, and I'm looking at that on a very regular basis. That is what's going to be the repetition, the visual part of it. But when you look at it, it should be something that you try to make as sensory rich as possible. So as you're looking at the vision board, the more sensory rich, what does it look like? What's the temperature there right then? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? The more sensory rich, the more we're going to translate from the upper part of our brain, which is language, sending it down to the animal part of our brain because it builds a cohesive image. Once it gets down there, then there's emotion involved. So we have the focus, the emotional involvement, and we have the agitation. And those all three work together all the time. So the more you can get a full visual picture and force that animal part of your brain to be emotional about the event, the more likely you are to achieve your goals. And the final piece of this is repetition. The more often you do it, the stronger those neurons will bond together. We see this in lab studies all the time. Neurons that are firing repeatedly begin to form a bond, and then more neurons form around it. So it begins from a path that you walk past the grass, and it starts to get paved more and more and more wide the more often you do something. So it becomes an automatic behavior and a superhighway. And then success becomes a habit. Discipline becomes not just discipline, but that just becomes a habit, something that you normally do. In the link below, I've put the fear brainwashing technique model inside of a goal setting worksheet that you can use to really crush your goals. I want you to try this out, and please reach back out to me if it works for you or if it doesn't. The final part of this is a question that I get all the time. How many goals should I set? There's 4 goal categories that I personally set goals in. This is brain, body, business, and behavior. Each one of those might have 2 or 3 goals in it. These are the big goals. Brain is the mechanism that will do everything for you. If you don't prioritize your brain health, what you're putting into your body, what you're doing to make your brain healthy, all of those things that are making your mental state and your psychology healthy, if those aren't happening, everything else is a domino effect of failure. The brain is the organism that makes everything happen. The body is next because the body is what you're using to achieve these goals. If you're writing a book, if you are starting a business and you're typing out emails, you're doing it with your body. The healthier your body is, the more likely you are to achieve your goals because the body is the vehicle that you're using to accomplish your goals. The next is business. And this could be how much do you want to make? How many customers do you want to have? We have a major contract coming up. I want to score this many clients a month, whatever it is. I do 2 or 3 business goals there. But I always use, for every single goal, I use the fear model. How will I make sure that I'm focused on this? How will I make it emotional? What will I do to ensure that I am agitated? My sense of self is a little bit shaken off. I'm letting my brain know this isn't the everyday situation. We need to pay more attention to this. And how will I make sure that I repeat this goal? And some of this might be I'm going to put reminders all over my house. Some of it might be I'm going to put reminders on my phone. I'm going to tell my phone, remind me every 3 hours to do X, Y, and Z. One thing I would highly recommend you do is put things everywhere you can to remind you to connect to your future self and think about your future self. One of my clients printed out a picture of themselves using an app that makes you look like 95 years old. So they would always know, I'm going to be that person one day. And they were able to connect with their future self. A lot of behaviors that were problematic before started correcting themselves. And if you think about this from that perspective, once we're prioritizing our future self and we've just got that mindset taken care of, everything else is a byproduct. So I'm eating better, I'm spending money in better places, I'm making smarter investments, I'm doing things with people, I'm building social relationships. That goes down to your relationship with your future self and how much and how often you think about that. So the fourth B is behavior. And behavior could mean I am going to schedule more time to focus on my self-discipline. I'm going to change my habits. I'm going to set goals better. I'm going to go see a counselor or a coach. I'm going to do something to make sure my mindset is constantly improving. And that's different from the health of the organism of your brain. We're talking about the ecosystem of your psychology. One critical thing you really need to have is a journal. No matter what you're doing with the goals for this year, for next year, for the next 10 years, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. My strongest recommendation is to bring as much awareness as you can onto your daily behaviors. Am I looking forward to my future self on a regular basis? Just rate yourself on a 1 to 10 scale every day. And the journal is the closest thing that you can ever have to a steering wheel on your own behavior. The more awareness you bring to it, the more control you're going to have over that behavior. Remember, the animal part of our brain cannot speak English or any other language. The more you want to speak to that, the thing that makes all of our decisions down there, it needs to be emotional, visual, sensory rich, and repetitive on a very regular basis. Just like when you got that new car and you noticed it out everywhere, you didn't have to try to do that. You looked at it on YouTube all the time, you looked at it online, you noticed you driving around, and eventually your brain starts thinking, this is becoming more important to this person. And you can absolutely do this. You can hack your way into it and do it on purpose instead of on accident. And that's the thing. All we're doing is just taking a few techniques to manipulate a 3-pound organism that's inside of our head. And it's an animal brain. So we've got to use techniques that speak to an animal. How would you show your dog the Taj Mahal? You could take them there, you could give them the smells of the experience, the temperature, we can do all kinds of things, but we can't tell them about it. So if you're setting goals, they need to be emotional. And they need to have a why, they need to have a deadline, and they need to have milestones associated with them, which you will all find in the download link. It's a free download with a goal setting worksheet using the fear brainwashing system. Please use this technique, brainwash yourself, and I promise you, this stuff works. Confident people have an unfair advantage over everybody else. In the business world, they get promoted more easily, they're more likely to get a raise, more likely to get out of speeding tickets, get bumped up to first class, get dates a lot easier. Confidence is incredibly unfair when it comes to the outcomes we get from our everyday lives. Let's talk about this from an evolutionary perspective. When we're in our infancy, let's go back 100 million years. The average group of people was 150 to 200 people in a little tribe. In this tribe, us surviving and us being able to have kids and live on, pass our DNA along, meant that we had to get along. We had to conform to a group. And that group was under some kind of leadership. So obedience to someone who is a proven leader, someone who we know is a leader, makes us automatically a little bit more compliant, and sometimes a lot more compliant. We've all seen the movie with Frank Abagnale, or about Frank Abagnale, called Catch Me If You Can. This movie specifically shows us that this guy had nothing but confidence, had almost no skills, nothing but confidence. This is where the term con man comes from, short for confidence man. But I'm going to show you something about confidence that I think might surprise you, and I'm going to break this down from a very behavior profiler level. So let's start with this tribe. As we're growing up in our infancy as humans, surviving and living meant that we had to belong, meant that we had to obey these people. And we rely on signals for those things. So our brains are constantly scanning everything around us to say, should I follow this person? Is there somebody here that I should be following? And they do this unconsciously, but they do it to help us. And it's the reason that we've survived. It's the reason that none of your ancestors died a virgin, was because they had this ability. They were able to fit in. And this is millions of years of programming that's built into our DNA. But let's just define confidence. Confidence is a generalized expectation of positive outcomes and a generalized expectation of capability. So nothing necessarily specific. And for many, many people, confidence itself is the single reason that they are successful in business, in sales, in relationships. Confidence gets them through things. So why do these people enjoy an unfair advantage over everybody else? Let's break it down from a behavior profiler's perspective. And I'm going to bring up this graphic here to show you that there's 5 things involved in how our brain becomes wired to listen to somebody else or to feel attracted to someone else in some way. And the first thing is internal assumed permission. So the person who has the higher confidence or maybe overconfidence, internally, they've assumed that they have permission to behave a certain way. You can do this too, and we're going to talk about that. So that's step 1. They have an internal belief that they have permission to act a certain way. So that forms into their behavior and forms into their beliefs. The next is a lack of reservation or uncertainty. So their behavior is smooth and fluid. It comes forward, and we can see this when Leonardo DiCaprio is playing Frank Abagnale in Catch Me If You Can. We can see this smooth flowing behavior from DiCaprio. We see this transition now. So we have assumed internal permission. I've internally assumed that I can act or do a certain thing. That's step 1. 2, I don't have any reservations or any uncertainty in my behavior. Number 3 is a sense of authority. Let's break down the word authority really quick. The first part of that word is author. This means that you create something or you make something. To write a book, you're an author. That is an internal thing for them. So the person that has high confidence goes through step 1, 2, and 3, having the authority, which is the internal belief that they're creating what's going on and they have permission to do it. And in the outside world, there's 2 things that happen. The first one is most important, and this is step 4 out of 5, social proof. This person acts with such confidence that we just assume that they've been this way their whole life. We assume that other people treat them X number of ways. We assume that people respect them. We assume people listen to them because of their lack of reservation. So their behavior alone, without us having to check with anybody else, they're just their behavior alone and their lack of reservation, sense of authority, we know that they've got this internal permission, makes us automatically assume unconsciously that they're followed or listened to by other people. So just their lack of reservation is what makes us assume others have already proven them to be a leader. And finally, on the fifth element of this, we have external assumed permission. So let's think about this. It starts with internal assumed permission in the other person. And they are so confident in their behavior that they lend that confidence to somebody else. And in this situation, we're talking about a con man. That person is giving permission to the other person that they're speaking to. And in reality, when we're having that dynamic, a person who is extremely confident with real confidence gives permission to other people to act a different way or to treat them with a certain degree of respect or trust or compliance. And that's what a con man or a confidence man actually does. So they are not just confident themselves, they're transferring the confidence to other people to act a certain way. In a lot of my courses, I teach persuasion, influence, and interrogation. We talk about persuasion all the time, but we're more in the business. In our courses, we teach a lot of this. We're more in the business of permission than persuasion. We're acting in such a way to give permission to the people around us. And that's how confidence really boils down. And you can absolutely do this. It comes down to giving yourself, step one, assumed internal permission to act a certain way. This is something you can absolutely do. If you've been waiting for permission, you've got it now. You can do this. It is something you can do. How can a normal person be talked into committing murder in less than an hour? What would it take to get somebody to completely deny every single instinct of survival and social behavior and cause the death of another person? What I'm about to show you is terrifying. It's the darkest side of psychology, and I'm going to show you what all of the experts completely missed. So before we launch into this scary stuff, let's discuss some extreme influence. I teach probably the most advanced persuasion and influence training in the world, but influence itself is just a tool. So like a surgical scalpel, it can be used to save someone's life, it can be used to take it. So a coach, a leader, a therapist, or maybe a parent could use the same influence skills to change someone's life that a cult leader uses to ruin them. So when it comes to ethics, the tool is only a tool. Let me introduce you to Dr. Stanley Milgram. In 1961, Dr. Milgram did something that would change the world of psychology forever. And this quote of his about this experiment has stuck in my mind since the day that I read it. And he said, I observed a mature and initially poised businessman enter the laboratory smiling and confident. Within 20 minutes, he was reduced to a twitching, stuttering wreck who was rapidly approaching a point of nervous collapse. He constantly pulled on his earlobe and twisted his hands. At one point, he pushed his fist into his forehead and he muttered, "Oh God, let's stop it." And yet he continued to respond to every word of the experimenter, and he obeyed until the end. That hit me like a ton of bricks when I read it. Anybody that you ask is going to say they could never be talked into such things. But I think you'll be surprised. So what causes a human to go from zero to killer? And if some of us are willing to kill because a stranger in a lab coat tells us to, should we worry? So what if, just like we have visual blind spots, we have behavioral blind spots, like maybe a small hole that allows a person to reach into our mind and start pulling some levers that they probably shouldn't have access to. None of us would really like to believe that we're vulnerable or this vulnerable to the world around us. And I think most of us tend to go through our lives just firmly believing that our minds are somewhat of a fortress, and the only things that really get in there are things that we're allowing to come in. This belief is called the fortress illusion. And not only is it incorrect, it's dangerous to believe. So let's talk about a behavioral loophole really quick. I define a behavioral loophole as an inborn quality of the human brain that has its roots in protecting us from harm. So these automatic responses to specific types of stimuli create a loophole in our behavior where we can instantly shift from processing information and cognitive reasoning to reacting to information and impulse reaction. So since these loopholes are universal in human behavior, they can be pretty reliably exploited, allowing an operator to basically predict an outcome and use that loophole to obtain some kind of desired impulse response, such as focus, excitement, or a strong desire to feel a connection with the other person. So, why and how can a person hijack a human's brain, their normal, rational decision making centers? So, let's go back to the Milgram experiment just for a minute. Imagine it's 1962. You respond to an ad in the newspaper that says, we're going to pay you $4 for an hour of your time. The ad says a study on memories being conducted at Yale, and they're going to need all types of people. So they're even going to pay for your gas to come to the campus. They'll probably give you a free sandwich. All you've got to do is mail a detachable coupon to Dr. Milgram. So when you arrive, this doctor greets you, and one other participant is in the lobby there and explains the study. So he says, we'll be conducting a study on memory and learning, and one of you will be the teacher, and one's going to be the learner. So the teacher is going to read off a pair of words to the person in the next room. If the learner responds incorrectly, you're going to administer some electric shocks. So you draw the straw, and it says teacher on it. The man in the lab coat shows you where the learner is going to be seated in the next room, and as he does, he lets you see the electrodes get placed onto this person's arm. He lets you feel the electricity even that the learner is going to feel in the next room. So he's sat in the learner's chair, you walk out of that room, right beside it, there's another room, and this guy in the lab coat closes the door, and now you're shown to this little teacher's station. At this desk right here, you're going to be seated, and there's a large electrical box there with different shock levers on it, ranging from 15 volts to 450 volts. And right after the 450 volt mark, there's some letters that say XXX, and then it says danger severe shock on there. So next to the machine, there is a clipboard with groups of words on them. You got to read them out to this person in the other room. And as you take a seat, every time they get it wrong, you have to shock them. So Dr. Milgram was average height. From all accounts, he was a serious dude. He grew up in the Bronx. Many of Dr. Milgram's extended family still bear Nazi concentration camp tattoos. So this left a huge mark on his personality. So at his own bar mitzvah, his speech was solely about the suffering of the European Jews and the stuff that they had to endure during World War II. And Milgram showed a special interest in this guy, Adolf Eichmann. He was an organizer of the Holocaust. The actions of Eichmann inspired the development of the obedience experiment. And Milgram simply wanted to know if it was true that, as Eichmann said while he was standing trial in Israel, that he was just following orders. So inside the Milgram experiment, the learner is in one room, the teacher, which is you, are in the other room, shocking this person because the person in the lab coat's telling you next to. With every incorrect answer, as the voltage increased, the teacher was told the microphone was just one-way communication tool to the other room, but he could hear the protests. He could hear screaming and pleas for help from the other side of the wall, and the sounds of the learner in pain. They were coming from a record player, actually, in real life, with pre-recorded screams and all that kind of stuff. He even says he has a heart condition. He wants to stop the experiment. All kinds of stuff is going on, and this guy in the lab coat is continually telling them to increase the voltage with every wrong answer. So you can imagine participating in something like this could be pretty damn stressful. That's why we don't have experiments like this anymore. But They continued shocking the other person. So initially, these scientists got together. They predicted that 99% of people would outright refuse. They argued the only people who would go all the way through with this were psychopaths or sadists. And they predicted only 0.1% of people would go all the way. But in fact, 65% of people about went all the way to maximum voltage. 250 volts can kill you. How many people do you think went all the way up to 250 volts? Surprisingly and sadly, it was 100%. So, of course, if somebody interviewed you and asked, would you go all the way up to 450 volts? You'd bet anything that you own you would never do anything like that. And you'd be able to resist the experimenter. I would walk out of the room. The experiment has been replicated dozens, if not hundreds of times with about the same results. Most people go all the way. Everybody obeys to some extent all the time. So why then do people obey? The experimenter didn't issue orders. He didn't shout. He didn't scream. He didn't make demands. He didn't have some secret persuasion technique. There was no hypnosis being used. They just listened. So let's look at a few more experiments here. I want you to investigate these with me. Another experiment that, in my opinion, is even scarier. A person volunteered to take a survey. They show up in a room. There's several other people who are already sitting down taking the same survey. And they're not knowing these people, these other people in the room are all actors. Smoke starts billowing from a nearby door. They see the smoke and they look around at the other volunteers, which are the actors in this one, and they seem not to care at all. So the actors have been told simply do nothing. So now smoke is starting to fill the room. Smoke detectors are going off and beeping like crazy. It's starting to look even more like there's a genuine emergency here. So the actors see the smoke, and they casually go back to filling out the survey. In this experiment, 100% of people sat in the room long enough to die of asphyxiation. And if the fire had been real, 100% would have died. So could this happen in real life, though? It actually did. In May of 1979, a cab driver reports a fire coming from a Woolworths department store in Manchester. They found some bodies, but they found most of the bodies in the restaurant. And it turns out people hadn't left because they wanted to pay their bill. They're operating on this social script that's just written in their mind. Nobody wanted to deviate from the group, and nobody wanted to be the first to really stand out from the rest of the crowd. So let's perform one more investigation into an experiment that shows how powerful this is. I want to introduce you to this guy here. His name is Dr. Solomon Asch. So the experimenter shows them with two pieces of paper, holds them up, and puts them on the table there, and one of them had a line drawn down the middle on it. Other sheet had 3 lines on it, just A, B, and C, and the students were simply just asked to determine which of the 3 lines was equal in length to the line on the other page, which only had 1 line on it. So 9 out of 10 of the students at the table were actors in the experiment, and only 1 person in the room was the actual participant. The actor students, obviously, would deliberately choose the incorrect line on the right. And Dr. Asch was just curious if the student would conform to the answers given by all the other people. So guess what? They denied the evidence right there in front of their own eyes and went along with the group behavior. So Dr. Asch, concluded that students mostly conformed for 2 basic reasons. They either wanted to fit in with the group, or they trusted the opinion of the group more than their own. So changing your behavior to fit in is called normative influence, and trusting a majority opinion over your own is called informational influence. No matter where you look, for the rest of your life, you're going to start seeing this behavior. Social media has made it even more powerful, just increasing the size of a group that can influence a person. And then they're only going to expose you to the news and the opinions that they want you to see. Exactly what they want you to see. So your behavior is conforming in ways that we're not even fully aware of. So people are going to tell you these experiments are about obedience to authority. I mean, Dr. Milgram wrote a book called Obedience to Authority. So authority essentially has five components. When we're talking about obedience to authority, according to me in my training, there are five components to authority that I teach. Those are confidence, discipline, leadership, gratitude, and enjoyment, or a sense of enjoyment. So these are very precise, and we're going to dig into these in a video next week. So if you're subscribed, you'll get a notification when that one comes out. But there is something missing. It's not just authority. This video is about what the hell these experiments missed. So let me show you right now. So I want you to imagine you're a volunteer in the Milgram experiment that we just talked about. You see the ad in the paper. You drive to a building that you've never been to before. You walk upstairs you never walked down, into a hallway you've never been to meet people that you've never met before. You see a machine on the desk you've never seen before that's supposed to shock a human being, which you've never done before. There's a brand new room you've never been in. There's new smells. There's new sounds. There's a new test. There's a brand new experience. New words that are unusual from the experimenter. This is what they missed. And it's called novelty. And I want to show you how powerful this is. And my goal here is to persuade you to completely change whatever you thought was going on with these experiments. So when something unexpected happens or something new is occurring, our brains ramp up our level of focus, which makes us more suggestible. Focus kept our ancestors alive. Therefore, they passed down this instantaneous focus switch to us to do the same. And when something is unexpected or new, we become focused on it instantaneously. This is not one of the things that we can just turn off. It's built into our brainstem. So from award-winning speeches to TV shows we can't stop watching, the injection of novelty is the fastest entry point into the human mind. And I'd like you just to imagine the Milgram experiment again, without any of the novelty. The guy in the lab coat is the volunteer's roommate, and the experiment is taking place in a familiar place, like maybe the volunteer's apartment. So it's in his own house. The person in the lab coat's the roommate. Boom. Authority goes to zero. Even if you replace the person in the lab coat with the professor, authority goes to zero. The novelty is not high enough to produce a tremendous amount of focus. So in order to leverage any authority, focus has to be present first. And the fastest pathway to focus is novelty. Something new is happening. So no matter how confident you are, no matter how much authority you have, if focus isn't there, you're getting nothing in return. We've inherited a lot from our ancestors. It's all built in there to help us survive, but sometimes these inherited traits make loopholes in us that can be hacked by somebody with training or skill. And in other situations, it can be leveraged to help a person, to maybe stop somebody from a negative behavior or change somebody's life entirely. The ethics live in you, not the technique. This is only part one of the series. And in the next video, we're going to investigate the 5 characteristics of true authority and how to get them. And I'm going to show you exactly how to seriously level up your life when it comes to influence and persuasion. Use these wisely. We rise by lifting others. This is something you can do. You have more training in this now than 99% of the world. Thank you for spending time with me today. I can't wait to see you again in the next one. Love you.
This is a video about the most famous problem in game theory. Problems of this sort pop up everywhere, from nations locked in conflict to roommates doing the dishes. Even game shows have been based around this concept. Figuring out the best strategy can mean the difference between life and death, war and peace, flourishing and the destruction of the planet. And in the mechanics of this game, we may find the very source of one of the most unexpected phenomena in nature: cooperation. On the 3rd of September 1949, an American weather monitoring plane collected air samples over Japan. In those samples, they found traces of radioactive material. The Navy quickly collected and tested rainwater samples from their ships and bases all over the world. They also detected small amounts of cerium-141 and yttrium-91. But these isotopes have half-lives of 1 or 2 months, so they must have been produced recently. And the only place they could have come from was a nuclear explosion. But the US hadn't performed any tests that year, so the only possible conclusion was that the Soviet Union had figured out how to make a nuclear bomb. This was the news the Americans had been dreading. Their military supremacy, achieved through the Manhattan Project, was quickly fading.
This makes the problem of Western Europe and the United States far more serious than it was before, and perhaps makes the imminence of war greater.
Some thought their best course of action was to launch an unprovoked nuclear strike against the Soviets while they were still ahead. In the words of Navy Secretary Matthews, to become aggressors for peace. John von Neumann, the founder of game theory, said, "If you say, why not bomb them tomorrow, I say, why not bomb them today? If you say today at 5 o'clock, I say, why not at 1 o'clock? Something needed to be done about nuclear weapons, and fast. But what? In 1950, the RAND Corporation, a US-based think tank, was studying this question, and as part of this research, they turned to game theory. That same year, 2 mathematicians at RAND had invented a new game, one which, unbeknownst to them at the time, closely resembled the US-Soviet conflict. This game is now known as the prisoner's dilemma, so let's play a game. A banker with a chest full of gold coins invites you and another player to play against each other. You each get 2 choices. You can cooperate or you can defect. If you both cooperate, you each get 3 coins. If one of you cooperates but the other defects, then the one who defected gets 5 coins and the other gets nothing. And if you both defect, then you each get a coin. The goal of the game is simple, to get as many coins as you can. So, what would you do? Suppose your opponent cooperates, then you could also cooperate and get 3 coins. Or you could defect and get 5 coins instead, so you are better off defecting. But what if your opponent defects instead? Well, you could cooperate and get no coins, or you could defect and at least get 1 coin. So no matter what your opponent does, your best option is always to defect. Now, if your opponent is also rational, they will reach the same conclusion and therefore also defect. As a result, when you both act rationally, you both end up in the suboptimal situation, getting 1 coin each, when you could have gotten 3 instead. In the case of the US and Soviet Union, this led both countries to develop huge nuclear arsenals of tens of thousands of nuclear weapons each, more than enough to destroy each other many times over. But since both countries had nukes, neither could use them. And both countries spent around $10 trillion developing these weapons. Both would have been better off if they had cooperated and agreed not to develop this technology further. But since they both acted in their own best interest, they ended up in a situation where everyone was worse off. The Prisoner's Dilemma is one of the most famous games in game theory. Thousands and thousands of papers have been published on versions of this game. In part, that's because it pops up everywhere. Impalas, living in between African woodlands and savannas, are prone to catching ticks, which can lead to infectious diseases, paralysis, even death. So it's important for impalas to remove ticks. They do this by grooming. But they can't reach all the spots on their bodies, and therefore they need another impala to groom them. Now, grooming someone else comes at a cost. It costs saliva, electrolytes, time, and attention, all vital resources under the hot African sun, where a predator could strike at any moment. So for the other impala, it would be best not to pay this cost. But then again, it too will need help grooming. So all impalas face a choice. Should they groom each other or not? In other words, should they cooperate or defect? Well, if they only interact once, then the rational solution is always to defect. That other Impala is never going to help you, so why bother? But the thing about a lot of problems is that they're not a single prisoner's dilemma. Impalas see each other day after day, and the same situation keeps happening over and over again. So that changes the problem. Because instead of playing the prisoner's dilemma just once, you're now playing it many, many times. And if I defect now, then my opponent will know that I defected, and they can use that against me in the future. So, what is the best strategy in this repeated game? That is what Robert Axelrod, a political scientist, wanted to find out. So in 1980, he decided to hold a computer tournament.
He invited some of the world's leading game theorists from many different subjects to submit computer programs that would play each other.
Axelrod called these programs strategies. Each strategy would face off against every other strategy and against a copy of itself. And each matchup would go for 200 rounds. That's important, and we'll come back to it. Now, Axelrod used points instead of coins, but the payoffs were the same. The goal of the tournament was to win as many points as possible, and in the end, the whole tournament was repeated 5 times over to ensure the success was robust and not just a fluke. Axelrod gave an example of a simple strategy. It would start each game by cooperating and only defect after its opponent had defected twice in a row. In total, Axelrod received 14 strategies, and he added a 15th called random, which just randomly cooperates or defects 50% of the time. All strategies were loaded onto a single computer where they faced off against each other. One of the strategies was called Freedman. It starts off by cooperating, but if its opponent defects just once, it will keep defecting for the remainder of the game. Another strategy was called Joss. It also starts by cooperating, but then it just copies what the other player did on the last move. Then around 10% of the time, Joss gets sneaky and defects. There was also a rather elaborate strategy called Grasscamp. This strategy works the same as Joss, but instead of defecting probabilistically, Grasscamp defects in the 50th round to try and probe the strategy of its opponent and see if it can take advantage of any weaknesses. The most elaborate strategy was Name Withheld, with 77 lines of code. After all the games were played, the results were tallied up and the leaderboard established.
The crazy thing was that the simplest program ended up winning, a program that came to be called Tit for Tat.
Tit for Tat starts by cooperating, and then it copies exactly what its opponent did in the last move. So it would follow cooperation with cooperation and defection with defection. But only once. If its opponent goes back to cooperating, so does Tit for Tat. When Tit for Tat played against Freedman, both started by cooperating, and they kept cooperating, both ending up with perfect scores for complete cooperation. When Tit for Tat played against Joss, they too started by cooperating, but then on the 6th move, Joss defected. This sparked a series of back and forth defections, a sort of echo effect.
Okay, so now you've got this alternating thing, which will remind you of some of the politics of the world today, where we have to do something to you because of what you did to us. And then when this weird program throws in a second unprovoked defection, now it's really bad, because now both programs are going to defect on each other for the rest of the game. And that's also like some of the things that we're seeing in politics today and in international relations.
As a result of these mutual retaliations, both Tit for Tat and Joss did poorly. But because Tit for Tat managed to cooperate with enough other strategies, it still won the tournament. We're being joined.
Hey, my God, there's Professor Axelrod.
Hey, Mr.
Whoa, what a treat this is.
And I imagine initially it'd be sort of like computer chess, where you need a pretty complicated program to play a sophisticated game. But in fact, it was not like that at all. It was the simplest strategy that did the best. So I analyzed how that happened.
Axelrod found that all the best performing strategies, including Tit for Tat, shared 4 qualities. First, they were all nice, which just means they are not the first to defect. So Tit for Tat is a nice strategy. It can defect, but only in retaliation. The opposite of nice is nasty. That's a strategy that defects first. So Joss is nasty. Out of the 15 strategies in the tournament, 8 were nice and 7 nasty. The top 8 strategies were all nice, and even the worst performing nice strategy still far outscored the best performing nasty one. The second important quality was being forgiving. A forgiving strategy is one that can retaliate, but it doesn't hold a grudge. So tit for tat is a forgiving strategy. It retaliates when its opponent defects, but it doesn't let defections from before the last round influence its current decisions. Friedman, on the other hand, is maximally unforgiving.
After the first defection, just from the opponent would defect for the rest of the game. Okay, that's it. No mercy. And that might feel good to do, but it doesn't end up working out well in the long run.
This conclusion, that it pays to be nice and forgiving, came as a shock to the experts. Many had tried to be tricky and create subtle, nasty strategies to beat their opponent and eke out an advantage, but they all failed. Instead, in this tournament, nice guys finished first. Now, tit for tat is quite forgiving, but it's possible to be even more forgiving. Axelrod's sample strategy only defects after its opponent defected twice in a row. It was tit for 2 tats. Now, that might sound overly generous, but when Axelrod ran the numbers, he found that if anyone had submitted the sample strategy, they would have won the tournament.
I mean, it's so clever. There's so many layers to this story. After Axelrod published his analysis of what happened, or circulated it among these game theorists, he said, now that we all know what worked well, let's try again.
So he announced a second tournament where everything would be the same except for one change, the number of rounds per game. See, in the first tournament, each game lasted precisely 200 rounds. And that is important, because if you know when the last round is, then there's no reason to cooperate in that round. So you're better off defecting. Of course, your opponent should reason the same, and so they should also defect in the last round. But if you both anticipate defection in the last round, then there's no reason for you to cooperate in the second to last round, or the round before that, and so on all the way to the very first round.
So in Axelrod's tournament, it was a very important thing that the players didn't know exactly how long they were going to be playing. They knew on average it would be 200 rounds, but there was a random number generator that prevented them from knowing with certainty.
Yeah, if you're not sure when it ends, then you have to kind of keep cooperating because it might keep going and you might need them on your side. Yeah. For this second tournament, Axelrod received 62 entries and again added random. The contestants had gotten the results and analysis from the first tournament and could use this information to their advantage. This created 2 camps. Some thought that clearly being nice and forgiving were winning qualities, so they submitted nice and forgiving strategies. One even submitted tit for 2 tats. The second camp anticipated that others would be nice and extra forgiving. Therefore, they submitted nasty strategies to try to take advantage of those that were extra forgiving. One such strategy was called Tester. It would defect on the first move to see how its opponent reacted. If it retaliated, Tester would apologize and play tit for tat for the remainder of the game. If it didn't retaliate, Tester would defect every other move after that. But again, being nasty didn't pay.
And once again, tit for tat was the most effective.
Nice strategies again did much better. In the top 15, only 1 was not nice. Similarly, in the bottom 15, only 1 was not nasty. After the second tournament, Axelrod identified the other qualities that distinguish the better performing strategies. The third is being retaliatory, which means if your opponent defects, strike back immediately. Don't be a pushover. Always cooperate is a total pushover, and so it's very easy to take advantage of. Tit for tat, on the other hand, is very hard to take advantage of. The last quality that Axelrod identified is being clear.
Programs that were too opaque, that were too similar to a random program, you couldn't figure them out because they were so complicated. It was very hard to establish any pattern of trust with a program like that because you couldn't figure out what it was doing. Not you, I mean, the other programs it was playing couldn't figure them out. And so they would end up more or less defaulting to thinking every turn is like the last time I'm going to see you, so I might as well defect. What to me is mind-blowing about this is that these 4 principles, being nice, forgiving, provocable and clear is a lot like the morality that has evolved around the world that is often summarized as an eye for an eye. It's not Christianity, by the way. It's not turn the other cheek philosophy. It's some older philosophy.
What's interesting is that while Tit for Two Tats would have won the first tournament, it only came 24th in the second tournament. This highlights an important fact. In the repeated prisoner's dilemma, there is no single best strategy. The strategy that performs best always depends on the other strategies it's interacting with. For example, if you put Tit for Tat in an environment with only the ultimate bullies of always defect, then Tit for Tat comes in last.
I wanted to see whether, for example, the Tit for Tat did well because it did well with really stupid rules that didn't do well at all themselves, and basically it took advantage of people.
So he ran a simulation where successful strategies in one generation would see their numbers grow, and unsuccessful ones would see their numbers drop. In this simulation, the worst performing strategies quickly shrink and go extinct, while the top performing strategies become more common. Harrington, the only nasty strategy in the top 15, first grew quickly, but then as the strategies it was preying on went extinct, Harrington's numbers also quickly dropped. This shows a main benefit of this simulation because it tests how well a strategy does with other successful strategies. After 1,000 generations, the proportions are mostly stable, and only nice strategies survive. Again, Tit for Tat comes out on top, representing 14.5% of the total population. Now, this process may sound similar to evolution, but there is a subtle difference, which is that in this case there are no mutations, so it's actually an ecological simulation. But what if the world you started in was different?
Imagine a world that is a really nasty place to live, more or less populated with players that always defect. Except there's a little cluster of tit-for-tat players that live in some kind of nucleus. And they get to play with each other a lot because they're geographically sequestered. They will start building up a lot of points, and also, because that translates into offspring, they'll start to take over the population. So, in fact, Axelrod showed that a little island of cooperation can emerge and spread, and eventually will take over the world, which is fantastic. How can cooperation emerge in a population of players who are self-interested, who are not trying to be good because they're good-hearted? You don't have to be altruistic. You could be looking out for number one for yourself and your own interests, and yet cooperation can still emerge.
Some argue that this could explain how we went from a world full of completely selfish organisms, where every organism only cared about themselves, to one where cooperation emerged and flourished. From impalas grooming each other to fish cleaning sharks. Many life forms experience conflicts similar to the prisoner's dilemma, but because they don't interact just once, both can be better off by cooperating. This doesn't require trust or conscious thought either, because the strategy could be encoded in DNA. As long as it performs better than the other strategies, it can take over a population. Axelrod's insights were applied to areas like evolutionary biology and international conflicts. But there was one aspect that his original tournaments didn't cover. What happens if there is a little bit of random error in the game, some noise in the system? For example, one player tries to cooperate, but it comes across as a defection. Little errors like this happen in the real world all the time. Like in 1983, the Soviet satellite-based early warning system detected the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile from the US. But the US hadn't launched anything. The Soviet system had confused sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds with a ballistic missile. Thankfully, Stanislav Petrov, the Soviet officer on duty, dismissed the alarm. But this example shows the potential costs of a signal error and the importance of studying the effects of noise on those strategies.
The word game sounds like it's a children's game, or there's something a misnomer maybe in calling it game theory, because these are life and death matters, obviously. And as you mentioned that this came up in the Cold War, I mean, it could actually be life and death of the whole planet. We could annihilate human civilization. So these are not games in any kind of trivial sense. It's just the term that is used by mathematicians and theorists.
When tit for tat plays against itself in a noisy environment, both start off by cooperating. But if a single cooperation is perceived as a defection, then the other tit for tat retaliates, and it sets off a chain of alternating retaliations. And if another cooperation is perceived as a defection, then the rest of the game is constant mutual defection. Therefore, in the long run, both would only get a third of the points they would get in a perfect environment. Tit for tat goes from performing very well to performing poorly.
So how do you solve this? Well, you need a reliable way to break out of these echo effects. And one way to do this is by playing tit for tat, but with around 10% more forgiveness.
So instead of retaliating after every defection, you only retaliate around 9 out of every 10